Membership means more with American Express Business Gold. Earn 4 times membership rewards points in your top 2 eligible spending categories every month, including eligible U.S. advertising purchases and select media, and U.S. purchases at restaurants, including takeout and delivery. What are you waiting for? Get the card that flexes with your spending every month. Terms and points cap apply. Learn more at americanexpress.com/business-gold. Amex Business Gold Card. Built for business by American Express.
This episode is brought to you by State Farm. From your morning podcast to your afternoon playlist, State Farm knows you personalize your entire day. And that's why State Farm helps you personalize your insurance with the State Farm Personal Price Plan. It offers coverage options that help protect what you care about most at an affordable price just for you. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices vary by state. Options selected by customer. Availability and eligibility may vary.
As wild as this whole situation is, that's been my biggest struggle, is that she cannot show up for me. So that's heavy shit, you know? I think it kind of goes back to, I've lived this life with my mom. She was very, very there for me in the sense of like, I'm going to get fed, I'm going to get taken to school, I'm going to get bathed. She reminded me of those things. Well, you didn't have a bad childhood. We've got a lot of darkness in front of us given this situation. I tried to almost put her on this pedestal and say, oh, wow, this is really going to like open her up and she's going to be available to me. And I think I kind of created this fantasy of this like healed journey we were going to go on together. And she proved me wrong in no time. So I then had to kind of over months, if not years, come to the realization that I have these expectations of my mom that she has never shown to me. Like, why would I expect her to be totally vulnerable, sit and cry with me, tell me how terrible she feels when she's never given me that? She's given me a lot of things, but she's never given me emotional connection and support. And so I had to come to the realization, wait a minute, you're actually setting yourself up for failure because that's not who she is. Just because you have this wild, raw dynamic unfolding, that's still not going to break her down. She's still going to put herself first. She's still going to have her guard up. And not even anything this big can allow her to connect with you. It's my birth story that she's a part of, and she can't tell the truth. So I think I just had to realize if I want her in my life, I have to accept her in the version that she is. And then we've now kind of gone full circle where I only expect from her the way that she's always been with me.
Welcome to DNA Surprises, a podcast that delves into the world of unexpected DNA discoveries. I'm your host, Alexis Auersalt. In July 2021, my life took a surprising turn when I found out that I'm an NPE, a person who has experienced a non-paternal event. In other words, my biological father isn't who I thought he was. Join me as we explore the stories of NPEs, adoptees, and donor-conceived people and their families. Get ready to unravel the astonishing journeys that begin with a simple DNA test. This is DNA Surprises. Every DNA surprise is unique. The who, what, when, and why surrounding an NPE vary from person to person. Still, after nearly 100 interviews, I've noticed consistent themes in these stories. One of those themes is a complicated mother-child relationship. When Jennifer took her DNA test, she had no idea that her family tree would change forever. As it turns out, both her mother and grandmother had relationships with the same man, making Jennifer's aunts also her sisters, and her cousins also her nieces and nephews. To add some clarity here, this man is not Jennifer's grandfather. He is a man that her grandmother had an affair with, resulting in 2 of her aunts. She discusses how she's faced the shame and stigma of this complicated story and how she's navigated her relationship with her mother. Jennifer and I spend quite a bit of time talking about the mother-daughter dynamic and how she was able to radically accept their relationship for what it is, not what she wants it to be. If you're currently struggling with this part of your story, I hope this conversation helps you. Thank you to Jennifer for so openly sharing her feelings on this, as well as her story.
My name is Jennifer. I am 47 years old, and I am in Texas. My story is kind of tangled in and around a web of like small town shenanigans. The way I think my story begins is with my maternal grandmother, who I called my nanny. Back in the 50s, late 50s, early 60s, she had some version of a drawn-out affair with a man that worked downtown in this small town. And I would say that legend has it, also photos that I've had visibility to, kind of speak to the fact that she was like the cat's meow. But I only know I'm a different version of her. I only know my nanny that was like the repented, saved version of her that followed like generations later. So again, I only have that snapshot of her through stories and some photos, but it certainly like paints a tale of her for me. So yes, my grandmother, she had this love affair, I would say, that's what I'm going to call it, with this man that worked downtown in this small town. And this produced the first two NPs in my family. So my mom was the firstborn child to her married parents. So the proper, up and running family in the like early 50s. And then about 7 years later, my grandmother gave birth to her second child, a daughter. And then 2 years later, another daughter was born. So in this long drawn out surprise where we've all learned different versions of one another, we learned that my mom's two younger sisters were NPEs. So all this discovery kind of came to light in 2020.
So they didn't know, they found out through, I'm assuming, DNA testing.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, everybody is through a surprise, just for fun, DNA kit test. So they have their own stories, right? Something I think I want to highlight in my story is that my nanny, she passed away, I think it was about 8 or 9 months before all these stories started unfolding. So she knew some things, as we've learned over the past 4 years, that she didn't share with any of us. But when the knowledge started surfacing, that's when we learned everything. So my nanny, what I wanted to share is that she was my person. So, I have my family, I've got siblings, I have aunts, uncles, nieces, nephews, but she was really like this person to me that I always had this very distinct draw towards. We shared a really strong bond and love for one another that was pretty evident to most people. She would never admit it, that maybe I was her favorite grandchild, but that's the way she made me feel. Yeah. They may all feel that way. So yes, in 2020, an aunt learned first that she had a biological father that was not her own. And my mom actually shared this information with me that her sister, so this is all on the maternal side of my family, these learnings. So all three of them. My mom shared with me that her sister found out through 23andMe that she had a dad, a biological dad that she, wasn't aware of. She shared that with me, and I had just started a brand new job. I was traveling for this job, and I kept thinking about it. I just didn't have the opportunity to really connect with my aunt on it, right? And kind of share you're on my mind, I'm thinking of you. It just kept surfacing in my head. A couple of months go by, the job's kind of settled in, and the pandemic hits, and I became furloughed. So as I'm living the very slow life at that point, I had time on my hands. And that's when I was actually able to connect with my aunt and share with her that, I felt for her, and it was just a tough thing to comprehend, and I'm there if she needs me.
What were you thinking in terms of your grandmother? So you kind of learned this truth about your grandmother. Did that change your perception at all?
It didn't for me. She had just passed away. Again, I think it was 8 months before. So I always knew that she had led this life that I had only had snapshots of in photos. So it wasn't a surprise to me that she may have been like a woman about town, so to speak. But it didn't change the way any of my relationship with her from 1977 on. I just accepted it as that was a part of her life that I didn't know.
Sure.
So with this new learning from my aunt that I, was able to process at that point, I'm like, oh, I think I'll log into my 23andMe account, what had been setting for maybe 2.5 years. I had taken it a handful of years before, again, just for fun, to kind of see maybe a little bit of medical information, maybe exactly where my lineage comes from, pretty like surface stuff. I had never gone in and toggled the view relatives button. Why would I? Right? I had no idea what was.
Yeah, you knew who all your relatives were, right?
Correct. So that being said, my aunt actually was holding the information from me that she knew something more than I knew, other than just her being an NPE. She didn't share with me things that she had visibility to through her own 23andMe profile. So when I logged in, turned on View Relatives, names pop up. I actually see my aunt listed as my sister and 40% DNA shared. Again, I knew nothing about DNA, how that's broken apart, what percentages you share with different family members. But the listing of sister, I did look up, and it's with 23andMe, it's like a suggested relationship. So I just kind of went on about my business, didn't think much of it. I'm like, oh, they have that wrong, scrambled, whatever that might look like. I would say a couple of weeks kind of tick by, and I think everyone's kind of like waiting for me to do the head scratch and make a phone call. But I just don't. Again, COVID had just like taken toll on the nation, and that's where my head was. I was like, I had been furloughed. Like, how long is this going to last? What are we in for? So a big distraction going on at the time. And then one evening, I was on the phone with my cousin. So this is my maternal aunt's daughter. We're just chatting like we do. She's actually 6 months older than me. We grew up very close. We grew up kind of like sisters. We were in the same grade, so they would dress us like when we were younger. In the small town, she's right there. So we're together not only for holidays, but after school, weekends, all those things. And she basically does like a temperature check. And she's like, what kind of mood are you in?
That's an interesting question. Yeah.
Right. Like, I'm free to talk. Thank God for her, honestly. Actually, I had made a joke. I said, I've seen this information on 23andMe about your mom being listed as my sister. Her dad must be my dad, meaning my birth certificate dad. Totally kidding.
Yeah.
That would mean that my birth certificate dad, the relationship to my aunt would be what? Her brother-in-law. Right? So
right.
My birth certificate dad being married to my mom, that would be my aunt's brother-in-law. So again, he's about 10 years older than her. So I said, oh, that must be your mom's dad. She's like, no, that's actually not the case. This unknown bio dad that has popped up, his name's Mr. on my mom's profile is actually your dad too. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Totally, it didn't go past my cranial frontal lobe. Like, it did not absorb.
And this is the same aunt who is an NPE, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
So we have learned she has the discovery that Mr. is her dad. She's listed as my sister. I don't process it. I don't even process it when it's spelled out to me. What it took is for me to get my brother. So I grew up in a house with a brother. He had done 23andMe. I reached out to him and I told him, I need your 23andMe password. I need to get into your account. So he gave that to me. And essentially, what I needed to do was to go into his profile and turn the toggle on View Relatives. Because until I could see it, that was really my checkpoint. I said to my cousin, well, I need to see my brother and see that he's listed as my half-brother because I can't process what you're saying to me. So I did that. I logged into my brother's account. I viewed relatives, and it showed me as his half-sister. So that, for me, was like concrete evidence that we had two different biological dads.
How are you feeling at that point?
Numb. Because I've grown up very close to the maternal side of my family. So again, mentioning my relationship with my grandmother was always very tight. Growing up in a small town, my grandmother owned like a plot of land. She had all 3 of her daughters. Homes built on that land. We can cross the creek. We can walk over driveways. We can be in and out of each other's homes. So grew up very close to them. Did not grow up terribly close to my paternal, my birth certificate dad's family. So I never totally felt like a Harris, I would say. I saw them on holidays. They lived probably 4 hours away. So I just wasn't like a part of the ins and outs of their lives. So there was definitely like a distance there, but again, no clue that wasn't my dad.
Did you have a close relationship with your dad?
I did. My parents divorced when I was in high school. I was in agreement with the divorce. Okay. I thought it was probably time to end the relationship. I would say from there, the distance began between me and my birth certificate dad, right? He moved out of the house. He was a heavy drinker. So that's just kind of what he put his energy and time into. And he's also deceased. Birth certificate dad and bio dad are deceased.
Okay.
Before any of this is learned.
So you couldn't talk to him about it or anything after you had this discovery?
No. And my paternal grandmother also deceased.
Okay. So if I'm understanding this correctly, your grandmother and your mother had a relationship with the same man.
Correct.
Okay.
Boom. I was born in 1977. So this includes not only my first aunt that learned, but my second aunt as well. Her story comes a bit later. She was the 3rd person to actually learn. She was a part of this web that had been woven. So yeah, my grandmother had this love affair with this man, created 2 children, never spoke that we know of to anyone about this information. And then, maybe 15 to 17 years later, my mom had an affair with this same guy. He was 20 years older than her. And at this point, when I've learned everything, she's the only living family member that can speak to any of this story because of everyone else being deceased.
What does she say?
She says not much. I think she has like the typical kind of mother response in a lot of these stories that I learn about. Probably her own version of denial, She's either blocked it out, never let it in, or maybe she's played pretend for, at this point I think it had been 43 years. And honestly was in disbelief, I would say, in shock at first, was not truthful to me. Again, I at this point in the story, it's been 4 years for me. Actually, tomorrow is my 4-year.
Oh, wow. I would say happy anniversary, but that doesn't feel appropriate for this kind of
Well, you
discovery.
can say that to me now.
Yeah.
I got a big smile on my face at this point. It took a long time to get there. But yeah, my mom, she's interesting around it. She will paint a picture into the fact that, oh, yes, during those years, again, around 1977, I was sowing my oats. I married your birth certificate dad very young. We were doing our own things. He was working nights. I would party at a house where this man, Mr. was hanging out, but I never had any interest in him. She'll kind of like paint this whole scene, but won't put the varnish on the painting, I would say.
Okay. And was she surprised, or did you think she seemed surprised when you confronted her?
I do think she seemed surprised because when her younger sister had learned who it was, she was all about it, sharing the story with me, sending me photos of him. Never in a million years did she have any hesitation around my aunt's story and who the man was.
Does she apologize to you, or?
No.
Okay. A common response. Yeah.
Yeah. She has zero accountability. So we've been through our own process. So again, 4 years tomorrow. I definitely had like a hiatus with her. I went 6 months or a little bit more, no contact. She disrespected those boundaries the entire time. I tried to go to therapy with her. I learned in maybe second session, this isn't going to work for me. She could not revisit the story and kind of do a redo. She was given the chance to do a redo. You've learned this information. Jennifer's having these feelings. What would you say to her? I can't come up with anything was her response. So complete shutdown mode. And again, not surprising for her.
But now you had her go to therapy with you. So obviously, I mean, you can smile about it now, but it did hit you at some point pretty hard. Can you talk about that?
I would say today that was actually my hardest lesson to learn, was the capacity that my mother does not have to lean into this and to put my feelings first. So, of course, learning that my biological dad is someone I've never met and will never meet was a huge shock. Of course, learning that my two maternal aunts are also my paternal sisters was literally the biggest head spin I hope I ever go through in life. You know, that not only makes that the case, but my maternal cousins are my paternal nieces and nephews.
Right. It completely changes your relationship to all of them.
It totally
in theory
does.
Yeah.
In theory, on paper. You know, we're talking about laughing now. I've even come to a point where I can laugh that my family tree looks more like a wreath. It doesn't exactly have roots in the ground and branches in the sky. It makes like a full circle.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of pain and hurt around the relationship with my mom. We've always had a very safe, like, surface relationship. So not a lot of highs and lows. She doesn't really go there emotionally with anything, but we've never had anything like this big blow up in our face and have to confront it together. So it's been a disappointment for sure. I've really just had to work through what is our new dynamic like. For me, I've had to be very patient and very understanding with her. It's just painted a picture of her as like a flawed human being rather than my mom that should do right by me. The most heart-crushing part about it is that she will protect her own feelings in order to jeopardize mine. And that's really painful. That's a really hard life lesson.
Yeah. And it does seem to be kind of a common thread, right? Where moms just can't go there, they block it, and accountability can be a huge issue. Were you able then to learn anything more about your biological father, considering that he had passed and your mom didn't share a whole bunch? What were you able to learn, if anything?
Growing up in this really small town in Texas, he was actually the editor and like owner of the local newspaper. So we've got this tiny little newspaper that comes out once a week. So when I was growing up, that's what he was doing. So I can't recall this man. I know his name and like his profession just because of who he was and what he did in town. But I can't recall ever seeing him or knowing who he was. He actually passed away the year I graduated high school. So in 1995, he died of cancer. So again, I would have been very young had I ever like crossed paths with him. But because we're from such a small town, I have photos of him. I have been in contact with his great niece, I believe she is. He had a handful of siblings, but they're all either passed away or in a capacity mentally, elderly, where they can't speak to anything. What I did do in some of my darkest of days and like those nights I couldn't sleep, you can actually online, you can pull up these newspapers from the 70s, even going back to the 60s and the 50s when he was the owner and editor. And I can see articles he wrote, I can see photos he took, I can see places he went and kind of some of his interests. So that's very interesting. Again, very surface kind of things, right, to learn about, because it's like published in a newspaper.
Yeah.
But they do give me some insight.
So you find these results, you finally kind of accept them after that initial shock and denial. You talk to your mom, not a lot there.
Right.
What else are you doing to process this?
Well, of course, I've reaching out to my aunts/new sisters. There was a time there when I tried to put them in a sister box. I'm like, oh, I've never had sisters before. But that is just not our dynamic. They are my aunts, and that's just the way that it is. My cousins aren't my nieces and nephews. That will just never change, and I can never even like shift the label and, my dynamic with them. So I definitely was able to kind of like connect with her, really one of them of the two more so. My one aunt, connect with her, kind of grieve through it together, have a lot of phone calls and just processing together was helpful. But I do think that I probably held it in a different capacity. All of my family comes from the school of, I would say, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, that kind of thing, where I immediately, one of the first steps that I took was reaching out to find a therapist. Once I could comprehend like the layers of all of this, the generational trauma, that my family will never be what I once thought it was. We could never go forward together in the same ways. I knew that I needed help, that I could not process it on my own. So that was a huge part of my healing, was finding the right therapist. And I have been with her for almost my entire journey. So maybe 6 months in is when we made the connection. So it's been like about 3.5 years, I believe, at this point.
Wow, that's incredible. And good for you for having the wherewithal to say, I've got to find some support through this.
And I think with my mom having such a kind of palm in my face, that just made it so much worse. So I knew I needed help to sort through all the emotions and really just how to approach the struggles, right? I had a lot of homework in the early days and early months. And then also a huge part of my therapy has been the focus on like the new relationship dynamic with my mom and what do my boundaries look like and what kind of behavior am I willing to accept from her? Because again, all of this blew up and it was so painful and shocking. You know, you've been through it, but it's like the rug is jerked out from underneath you.
Absolutely. And the relationships with moms, I think, often do change. You said for a while you went no contact with her. At what point did you resume contact? And what does that look like now after, learning things through therapy?
Life was moving forward while I was processing everything. So I initially had the learning. I tried to talk to her on my own. I tried, I even had moments where it was, oh my gosh, this terrible thing will bring us closer together. We've always had this very surface relationship. And I thought, oh my God, there's so many raw emotions and so many learnings to be had together. We're totally going to connect on this and grow together and have this, fairy tale mother-daughter relationship. And that went sideways very quickly because she was not responding to me reaching out to her. She would say things to me that I'll never forget. She would say things. She did tell me one time, the reason you're struggling with this so much more than me is because I'm closer to God than you are. So in the meantime, my stepfather, who has been in my life since I was 18 years old, so decades, right? I never grew up in a house with him, but he was a great bonus dad to me. He's becoming ill and struggling and declining very quickly. So my mom is dealing with this. So I had to give her the respect there, and I had to give him the respect, I think is what it was. In his ailing years, I didn't want to remove myself from him. So I was around, them as a married couple when I had first learned all of this to support him. And we were trying to get him help. So that was a lot of our focus at the time. So there was kind of this dual drama going on, I would say.
Sure. Yeah.
And then once he passed away, I believe that was in 2021, something, whether it be subconscious or not, kind of shifted in me. And I said, okay, now I've got to protect myself at this point. And that's when I informed my mom. It was actually the learning of my second aunt. In 2021, my stepdad passed away, and I happened to log into 23andMe. I guess I'm torturing myself at this point. And there she blows. I had said the entire time, I know my other aunt is a part of this. I know she is. I know she is.
And what was it that made you think that?
She and I look so much alike. I grew up super close to her. She only has one son, and she's 15 years older than me. So she's, a bit younger than my mom and then 15 years older than me. I just grew up really close to her. She didn't have a daughter. She was like my young fun aunt that would take me school shopping and let me drive her car when I was far too young and just treated me really special and did sweet things for me when I was a kid. But we were always told, hey, you guys could be sisters. Thinking, of course, we, come from the same lineage. Not knowing that there's this dual thing going on with lineage. So I just had this truth in my heart that I knew she had to be a part of this story just because, honestly, based on my connection to her maybe, but also that our looks are so similar. It's actually her son that takes the test. So my cousin, my maternal cousin / paternal nephew, he pops up with a strange amount of DNA shared. You go to, view shared relatives, I believe is listed as, and you've got them on both sides of the family. So that gave away to me that, yes, she's also a part of Mr. C's legacy.
Business taxes. Was stressing about all the time and all the money you spent on your taxes.
This is my bill?
Now Business Taxes is a TurboTax small business expert who does your taxes for you and offers year-round advice at no additional cost, so you can keep more money in your business. Now this is taxes. Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on turbotax.com/business. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
And how does it feel to see it the second time? I guess third time total, but second and.
I was pissed. I just like this rage of, oh my God, we're going to have to go through this again. I was actually shaking. That is the one and only time that I emailed my therapist and I said, can I please fit an appointment in before my scheduled time?
I'm curious, what about it made you angry? Because the first aunt, you had compassion. Of course, you didn't know that you were involved. And then for yourself, you have that grief, shock, all those feelings. And then the third time you feel anger. You said it was because you were going to have to go through it all again, but did something else come up?
It's like the truth is handed to you on a platter, but I couldn't get willing participants to admit to the truth. And it was so very frustrating. Not that my mom knows what happened, when she was 10 years old or whatever, but we have so much evidence and science-based evidence, but I couldn't get her to speak to my story and give me the truth. So I think it really exacerbated some of those wounds.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. Is that when you go no contact with her?
That's when I go no contact with her. She tends to make a lot of the story about her, believe it or not. She just had a terrible response when I got her on the phone and I said, okay, so your second sister's involved as well. She has this cackle, laughs it off, knows I'm in all of this pain for months on end and just can't even put herself in my shoes to empathize, not even for that, phone call. And it just really set me off and turned me off. And I told her during that conversation, you're holding me back. I can't move forward with you in my life. So from this point forward, I'm not going to be speaking to you. Keep you posted.
And you said she didn't respect those boundaries. So what did that look like?
She just continued to text me. Something would happen with somebody maybe that we knew together, like a person in town, and she would want to reach out to me about it. Only through text. Never did she phone call me, but I never responded. My stomach would drop when her name would come up on my phone. Like, here we go again. It's kind of like my visceral reaction.
Mm-hmm.
Because I just couldn't see clearly with trying to focus on my own healing and then have the dynamics of her wanting to deny my truth. I just felt that at that time it was appropriate. Did it feel great to me? No. At the end of the day, that's my mom. We have a lifetime of shared history. It was hard to completely go cold on her. But, I shared an example of the God comment she made. Right before that, something she had also done that kind of solidified my decision to go no contact is I get a text from her And it's a photo of myself and my brother, which I now know to be my half-brother. It's this Olin Mills photo. I'm like 3 and he's 5 or whatever. And her caption or her text below the photo is, "It's hard to believe the results." So fully gaslighting me.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really painful. I can remember like where I was, what I was doing when I got that text out of the blue. And I just thought, I don't have to put up with this. Like, I don't have to be sitting here enjoying this moment and have this sneak attack. That is my boundary. So that's what all solidified essentially cutting her off for some time.
Okay. And how did you come back together in a way?
What we decided to do, I think, at this point, I'm in contact a lot with my aunt, her sister, my sister also at this point. It's like, who shares sisters with their own mother?
Right.
Like, that's
yeah. Yeah. It's very confusing. Yeah.
It is very confusing. My entire foundation was, shook with my own discovery. And then my mom not being able to support all of that pain and suffering. A lot of my journey as well and my recovery has been around the shame that I carried, just around having that new kind of like aunt-sister dynamic.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that because it is sort of this interesting experience that you're having. I imagine that it's something that happened a lot. Maybe it still happens in other cultures, but in our history, but there is like maybe a little bit of a stigma or shame that kind of butts up against it. If you feel comfortable, can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I would say, I think like the small town was kind of what led to this, I would imagine, just because there's only 3,000 people walking about any given day. So I would imagine that's what even laid the foundation for this situation to present itself. But I've always kind of like beat to my own drum, and I've really prided myself in having removed myself from this small town. I would never want to change where I grew up or those childhood memories, but the moment I was able to leave, I took off and I soared and I never looked back. So it really was like a kick in the gut to kind of learn like, oh, you've come so far and you've had this kind of like creative journey along life, and then let's ground you in a very shocking way to let you know that you came from this community that's quite tangled, right?
Okay.
And the word that always comes to me is I actually have this T-shirt I've had for years, but what it says on the front is "Backwoods Baby." And it's just like, oh, because it's like, oh, you came from this small town, you're from the sticks, you're from the backwoods. I have this story, right, that's so intimate to me, and I'm afraid to share it because it's like embarrassing in a way. I've had to work through it as well, but I wanted to paint Mr. as this big jerk that had all these ulterior motives and like had, again, this is all a story I've painted in my head, that he had this love affair ongoing for years with my grandmother, and maybe something went sideways, not in his favor. And then does he go after my mom? Is kind of like a F you, and then I'm this F you baby? Like, I don't know.
So a lot of questions around how did this come to be sort of thing.
Right,
Yeah.
because at the end of the day, perhaps my mom didn't know about Mr. and my grandmother, but he knew, right?
Right.
He knew exactly what he was doing. That was a part of my process, is that this deceitful man is like, his blood's running through my veins, because I don't have anyone to like reach out to and validify exactly how this all went about.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much for kind of speaking to that, because, a huge purpose with this podcast is to reduce that shame and stigma. And it's awesome to hear that you've been able to overcome it and still kind of working through some of the pieces.
It's a couple of things. Like when I would first, even to my closest of friends, I immediately had them on the phone or in person and telling them my full story. Totally shook. They're there for me. But there are a subset of, like, I would say my Halo friends, right? Who I would say, oh yeah, I had this terrible learning through 23andMe and my dad's not my dad. But it took me a couple of years to share that second effect of my story. I couldn't even share my story to some of my own people, again, until I had processed it on my own.
What do you think helped you through that?
I think my commitment to therapy and my commitment from my therapist and just the continued focus, it's probably been, a couple of years ago now. I would just have this twisted kind of irky, like, oh my God, I can't believe those are my sisters. I know a lot of NPs struggle with, I don't know who my family is, or they deny my reality, or they, I reach out to them and they want nothing to do with me. Very painful things that some people go through in regards to their story. I don't have that built into my story, but I had the shame around sharing sisters with my own mom. And then one day I'm like in the shower thinking about things, and I had this very just kind of aha revelation that really just was about taking the narrative and turning it maybe 180 degrees. I just thought to myself, I have been with my people all along. They are not a mystery to me. They've loved me from the beginning. I've got to spend every holiday and birthday and weekend and some vacations with them. All the while, a twisted secret we weren't aware of, but I have all shared memories with them. They're my family, so I don't have that pain and suffering of like never knowing them or never having spent my growing up years or my time with them.
That's a really beautiful perspective. And I know that your mom kind of did a little bit of the spiritual bypassing, right? By saying, I'm good with it because my religion and everything. And I'm never here for toxic positivity, but I am always here for silver linings when we can find them. And I think that that's a really beautiful perspective, that you can have gratitude for the fact that you were around these people and they aren't a mystery to you.
No, and he probably wasn't aware of any of it,
Sure. Okay. I think I remember this from the meetup that you joined. Did you share that you were becoming a coach?
I did, yes. So that would be another thing to speak to in regards to my healing. It's that human connection, right? And when I first learned my story, of course I have my aunt that I can kind of like lean on, but she was just processing it differently than me. And I had a therapist and I had friends to talk to, but I needed the community. I needed to sit across from either a Zoom camera, whatever it might be, a circle, whatever, and someone say to me, I know exactly the way you feel right now, right? Mm-hmm. So yes, in all my kind of digging, that's when I was really turned onto podcasts to hear people speak of their stories, but just lots of research I was doing. And I learned about the International Association of Trauma Recovery Coaches. So, that's an online group that offers trauma recovery coaching in one capacity. So I was able to take those classes and fulfill that and earn my certificate. And then beyond that, they offer an advanced certificate that is just around the MPE and those stories and, the healing of that journey. So I then took those classes and checked off that certificate. Yeah, so I am actually certified as a trauma recovery coach with an NPE specialty.
And are you currently seeing clients?
I'm not. I'm very open to being coach, to anybody who's in need of help, but I don't actually have a website or any kind of name out there, any kind of marketing happening.
Okay. Well, if you do, please share so that I can connect the community with you. I'm always excited to see more resources available as this phenomenon continues to grow.
Yes, no doubt. I mean, I have an email address that I could give.
Sure. If you want to give that to me, I'll put it in the show notes.
It's actually 00jharris, HARRIS, @gmail.com.
Okay.
So totally willing and open to talk to anyone one-on-one that's going through their own strife, because, I know what it's like.
Yeah, absolutely. What's next for you on this path?
That's funny that you ask. Getting my coaching up and running is definitely a focus. I've just had a lot of life events. I'm actually relocating, in 10 days, I believe it is. I've switched careers. I've been traveling there. So I think the continued focus around coaching in some capacity, I don't think it will ever be my main force, but to stay a part of the community and be as helpful as possible is definitely like a focus for me. I would say I feel whole and recovered. I have my moments. My mom is in my life. We have a very, I would say, boundary respectful relationship at this point. I just learned I have a better just kind of personal balance if I allow her to be in my life, but kind of under my rules and regulations. That's what works for me.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So a lot of radical acceptance there with my mom. She's who she is, and she's very limited, and she's shown it in a number of ways. So that will probably always be a part of my journey, is just kind of, I guess, nurturing my own heart around my relationship with her to make sure that I stay in recovery mode, right? I mean, honestly, she would like never speak of it again if I never did. I like to remind her, though, of my situation. We have phone conversations. They're very surface. I reach out to her for like mom things. I'm like, oh my gosh, I overwatered this plant and it's drowning. What can I do? Help me with the soil.
Mm-hmm.
I don't cry to her. I don't show my true self. She's not available to me. So I've gone back to the dynamic that I've always known.
Yeah. Thank you for talking about this. I really think that there's people out there who probably need to hear that. Taking it for what it is and not what you want it to be is a practice.
100%.
Every day. Yeah.
Because I don't necessarily want this to be my story.
Right.
You know, I'm not in resistance to it at this point. I would say at one point I didn't necessarily want this to be my story, but it is my story. And she is who she is. And we are where we are. And so, do I feel sad for her as a person? Yeah, I do. It's hard at times, but I know where I can and can't go with her. And I don't really address that with her at this point. I don't, say to her, you're letting me down or you're disappointing me. I don't have to, because I don't reach out to her in those ways. I made mention that I like to remind her of my story. That's just some sort of power that I hold. She would go the rest of her lifetime never speaking of it. I had mentioned to you earlier when we first started chatting, I wanted to highlight my relationship with my nanny, right? So Mr. He had this relationship with her and they had these love children and whatever that might have been. But again, I've always had this draw to her. We were always very close. And the most recent mention to my mom, I had her on the phone and I gently brought something up and I said, I've decided that it's the Mr. in me that was so in love and drawn to Nanny. And she just scoffed at me as quick as she could. But, these are those sleepless nights early on where it's what in the world is this twisted story leading to? And I just had an aha, maybe it's the him in me that was just so in love with her in a sense and just so enamored by her creativity and all these things that she did. Again, it just kind of helps me kind of close all the chapters and fit all the puzzle pieces together. I'm like, well, that would make total sense.
Yeah. Yeah.
We keep coming back to mom and that tough relationship. Myself, and as with any NPE, again, if you go down to those deep thoughts, and I've always had this distance with my mom in a sense. Again, she would never admit that. But it goes back to my birth story. And, has she known this all along? Has she always had a bit of a wall up between us because she knows the story and she knows where I come from. And so she's never allowed me in from the get-go. I never had a chance.
What advice do you have for a parent who is keeping a DNA surprise from their child?
My advice would be to tell the truth. I think it's a terribly hard conversation to have, but I think at the end of the day, if you can speak the truth to someone about their own story, that's only going to build trust in the relationship with a parent and a child.
What advice would you offer someone who just uncovered a DNA surprise?
Take a breath, go for a walk, take in nature, really just try to ground yourself in any kind of stability that you've always known. I don't like to offer the advice that time's going to heal all the wounds. When you're living in it moment by moment, it is far too hard to see past that. So I think any kind of like grounding or stability that you're accustomed to, really lean into that and remind yourself you're still the person that you know yourself to be. You may have a different makeup or maybe ethnicity or relationships with folks are not what you thought, but that doesn't change the personality and the character that you have fostered and have become along the way. It's one of those, this changes everything, yet this changes nothing.
Jennifer, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for being so vulnerable with your experience with your mom and overcoming shame and stigma. I really think this will help a lot of people, and I wish you the best as you move forward in your journey.
Thank you so much, Alexis.
Thanks again to Jennifer for sharing her story. If you have a DNA surprise that you'd like to share, please submit your story at dnasurprises.com. Until next time. This episode of DNA Surprises was hosted, produced, and edited by me, Alexis Auerselt. It was mixed and mastered by Josh Auerselt of Siren Recording Studios.